Hi folks, this next story is the sort of end of the 1960s coming of age timeline, and that is T. Corrigason's Boyle's, or T.C. Boyle, which he also goes by, and which is also much easier to say, so that's what I refer to him as. It's his story Greasy Lake. Now, Greasy Lake was published as the title story in a collection, so this collection, Greasy Lake and Other Stories, and this was, the one that sort of led the collection as the title of it. It's a very famous short story of T.C. Boyle's, and although it was published in the 80s, it reflects, the entire collection of Greasy Lake and Other Stories reflects this period of the 1960s, this very specific time period, this very specific energy that existed, especially for young people at this period of time. And T.C. Boyle himself was a bit of a little bit of a rebel. He's a little bit into the punk scene, so he was very familiar with the spirit of that time. One of the reasons that he's so interested in this, and one of the things that has united all of the stories that we've looked at in this unit, is he says, one of the astonishing things about looking back at old stories are their references to the then current political and social events. We write in a given period, and that period seems to vanish rather quickly, so that all stories become historical the moment they're finished. Which, of course, has some validity to it, right? All of these stories speak to a very, very specific time period. But one thing that we're looking at in critical analysis is, of course, how they speak to all time periods, how they speak to a universal spirit of youth. So that's something to keep in mind, although does inform his state of mind in this story. So another piece of context that's useful for you to approach this story with is the context of the Vietnam War, particularly the Vietnam War and its effect on young men. So at this point, we're getting to the end of the 1960s, even early 70s. It's not precise in the story, but we're at the end of that decade. And in the course of that decade, the Vietnam conflict has become a more increasingly present issue in a lot of people's minds. Vietnam was a very violent, unpopular war at the time, particularly among young people, and particularly among young people who were in college or were more artistic, or who were drawn to this anti-establishment counterculture. So not only was it not a popular conflict, and you had massive, massive protests of the war and of the violence and death of so many Vietnamese people. Not only was that going on, but you also had 40,000 young men getting drafted into service a month for a period of years. And so a lot of men, young men, were rightfully fearful of this, and if not fearful of it, bitter, or sort of grappling with it in a way that perhaps was difficult to fully come to terms with or fully be conscious of in terms of your self-awareness. So, this is a story about a group of young men who are friends, college age, during this period of time. And although they're not enlisted, they're not veterans, I want to be clear. In the spirit of symbol and figurative language, it's good to have the idea of war and that conflict in your mind. As well, T.C. Boyle has a philosophy when it comes to writing. He does not really subscribe to the belief that writing must be abstract and sort of dense in order to be good. He once said that if you need a critic to interpret a story, then the writer has failed. So he believes in stories much like he believes in another one of his art forms that he took part in, which is music, that it is primarily a form of entertainment, and should be for pleasure rather than for this literary craft. And of course, things can be both, but I do encourage you to go into this story thinking about both sides of that equation. I hope that you find that T.C. Boyle did not fail. I hope that you find it both entertaining and critically enlightening. But going into this story with more so of entertainment or artful aspect, and drawing conclusions from that experience, knowing that that was the spirit T.C. Boyle wrote it in, I think can be a useful and hopefully fun experience for you. He once said, "My ambition is to make great art that is appealing to anyone who knows how to read." So I hope that you find that to be the case in this story. Don't forget to stay tuned after your story for a deeper analysis, and I look forward to seeing what you think about T.C. Boyle's Greasy Lake.